Welcome to the Luke Macias Show. Today, I'm going to have a conversation with Garrett Fulce, who is a longtime Republican operative and activist from Fort Bend County. More importantly, he's somebody who, from the podcast he has and the comments he's made online, has been, I think, only critical of things that I and people on the more conservative side of the GOP have done or said over the last several years as this conversation has been had and these battles have been had. And so I have invited Garrett on the podcast a number of times, and he decided 5-6 weeks ago to say, hey, I'm willing to come on the show. And so I wanted to get through the good, the bad, and the ugly session and a couple other things, and now have time to sit down and talk with him. We are going to talk about a couple of the different issues going on, the current special session. And my questions to him will be, and I have not recorded this yet, so sometimes we record the intro after the conversation, but I'm recording it now. So the point is that I could tell you that we'll also have a conversation about just the two different factions predominantly in the Republican Party and where we agree and where we disagree. So we shall see where this conversation goes, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. Let's get to the conversation between myself and Garrett Fulce. Garrett, thank you for coming on. I know we've talked about potentially having a conversation at some point for a little while, and I appreciate you joining the Luke Macias Show today.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Luke.
Absolutely. Let's start off. I know you and I talked about maybe just starting off with a conversation about the current special session going on, which started just a couple days ago. We have 18 items, 30 days. What is kind of your viewpoint on the policy that's on the call and the potential for kind of Republicans to all unite behind the agenda that Governor Abbott has set for us?
I think it's going to be a lot of waiting to see whether the Democrats break quorum. I think a lot of stuff the Republicans will unite behind. The open questions really are how we go about figuring out these policy issues. The governor seems to have moved a little bit in direction towards Lieutenant Governor Patrick, but on the SB 3 from the regular session, I think it's SB 5 now.
Yeah, the THC ban.
Yeah. So basically, how is that going to get rolled out where folks who are taking it for therapeutic reasons aren't hurt necessarily, while the people who are doing it to get high, are doing it illegally. So that's I think one of the more interesting ones. But the other questions basically seem to be how we're going to go about it. There's a lot going on.
Do you agree that we should try to pass the abortion pill bill, the Women's Privacy Act, these pieces of legislation that fell short in the regular session? Do you think Republicans can kind of all agree these are good Republican policies that we should pass in the 30 days we have?
Yeah, I think the abortion pill one for sure. I'm not as versed on it. I think the pushback on it had more to do with what other medicines that have nothing to do with abortion might get caught up with it, because there's a lot of direction move towards telehealth. But yeah, absolutely, we should be banning abortion pills. Abortion's not legal in Texas, and more deaths happen from abortion pills at home than they do under surgical abortions.
Yeah, I think on the low end they're talking like 19 to 20,000. Yeah. It's hard to calculate at this point because you have those QR codes in like girls' bathrooms in colleges and high schools that you just take a picture of, and the problem is that it's unclear as to whether or not those individuals who are shipping in all those abortion pills to people are breaking the law at that point.
Yeah, and they should be. Yeah. I think that's more of a, how do we make sure not only we passed the bill, but it's a bill that actually stops the problem, right? And there's a lot of the issues I have with anything that's proposed necessarily is that I don't think it's going to do what it says it's going to do. It's first, second, and third order effects might be far more problematic for conservative causes than what it's allegedly trying to fix. What was the other issue you mentioned?
The women's privacy, just biological males staying out of women's restrooms, bathrooms.
I know there was pushback from the Supreme Court on something related to that at some point. I think Gorsuch flipped, but I think it's worth the fight. So they should be able to pass it. I don't remember why it failed in the regular session.
Yeah, I think it just never was voted out as state affairs. And, Ken King did not publicly say why. But I think that, what is generally understood is that he just felt like they were doing enough and that was unnecessary at the time. But ultimately,
with the change of how we define man versus woman being codified, there's all sorts of ways in which that might be now more. He might be right in which the law already covers it now. I don't know for sure.
It definitely doesn't. And that was actually a conversation that Republicans had.
Yeah.
I think in his mind, it was like, well, we're doing something that's against the transgender people, so I don't want to do a second thing against the transgender people. But it was kind of clearly talked through. I think by the end of session, everybody knew the defining of man and woman in statute, which is a good bill. I think you and I both agree.
Yeah.
Does not keep a biological man out of a women's only space, because it in itself still leaves this gray area of when you have a designated space for where women are in a private space, can a biological male enter that identifying as a female? Because there's nothing in law that says he can't, whether or not man and woman are clearly defined in law. Right. And so it does not restore all order to the universe, if that makes sense.
And for something like that, I've run into the situation a couple times where being on the road with my son, who's of an age with a diaper change, there's been one situation where the only place they had a changing table was in the women's bathroom. So I kind of knocked on the door, yelled out, cleared the room, and it's right at the front. I wasn't like, they would see what I was doing and why I was in there. But, you kind of have to do what you have to do to do things along. I wonder if there's how that'll change. And then also that type of stuff. But yes, generally speaking, especially in schools, I know the locker room stuff. It's like, yeah, we need to make sure that these spaces are safe, because when it comes to the transgender issue, like there are any number of folks who are trying to use the laws to their benefit in a way which is to every woman's disbenefit. So it's something we need to address.
Well, you said something earlier that I think I can relate to, maybe in a different way, but I think conservatives' concern most of the time that bills are moving through the session is whether the bill actually does what it says it's going to do, right? So you said we never know what's going to end up. I think that's been probably one of the biggest criticisms that conservatives have levied in the past over the different legislation that's moving through the process, where you go, okay, well, this China land ban, as it's being considered, is not going to keep Chinese nationals from buying Texas land. It's going to be very tailored to only certain Chinese nationals, as long as they're in China, and then they can only not buy certain land, which means they can still buy land, just not this kind of land, and then anybody else who's still a citizen can buy all the land. And it is similar. There was like an in-state tuition ban last session, and when the committee substitute came up in the House, it was a bill that expressly laid out how illegals were going to keep getting tuition discounts, right? So you go, this is purportedly an in-state tuition ban, which illegals currently have access to. But in the bill itself, when you read it, you realize illegals are going to still get discounted college tuition. And so I think one of the things that conservatives have fought for often is saying, let's figure out what the bill does and then call it that, right? If it is a slight restructuring of how illegals get discounted college tuition, let's call it that, not the in-state tuition ban or the China land ban. But a good example with China land is it was able to, this session, through a number of different fights that were had, get restored to a version that everybody could agree on. So now you have this entire Republican apparatus united. You have the chairman of the GOP and the Speaker of the House, the governor and lieutenant governor, issue advocacy groups that are fighting for it, SREC members that are working on it, and precinct chairs, and chairman of Dustin Burrows, all saying this is a great bill. So when we can get it to that point, I think that is a uniting place to arrive at, is substantive policy that does what we say it's going to do.
Right. I think part of the problem I see isn't when it works. It's when it doesn't work. Because what you'll have is people who are very wedded to the way they think it should be done.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be at the party, the party platform meetings, or just on the party floor, reading through like how people ideate how this legislation is going to happen without the strict the restrictions of the law and how the Constitution in Texas works. And then you meet the legislative process, which is inherently built to kill bills. It is like the legislative process is built to protect people from a runaway legislature. So it's meant for a lot of people to have to agree on something, like you said in this context with the foreign land bill. But what we end up having is people who are like, "Oh, this is how it should work in an ideal society," or whatever else. And it's like maybe, and we can have a whole philosophical argument when we're talking about the restrictions of the Texas Constitution, which are many, coupled with all the restrictions of how legislation gets passed. Yeah, it has to go into that process and come out, and hopefully it comes out the way you like the land bill, or it doesn't come out at all.
Yep.
So it's these things typically take time, argument, negotiation, people making their case for why certain abstract or like really the real minutia of legislation, why changing one slight word or even one big word will dramatically change the impact of how the bill is affected,
Mm-hmm.
or is effective. Like that's the real meat of it. But when we get to campaign season, all that nuance goes out the window. Like this person's a rhino because they voted against it. It's like, well, they were trying to get it to a better spot. And then some people may, or depending on which side you're on, were a little bit too resolute in their defense of how something should move forward. And then it just died because we didn't get an incremental gain. We got no gain. That's where I come down on it.
Yeah. So I'm sure there's a million examples we can think of.
Sure.
One I think of when we talk about like one word being different, right, was when the Texas Senate passed a bill, I think it was 2 sessions ago at this point, that said it is illegal for somebody to cast a vote illegally, right? So if you
Right.
cannot vote and you vote, that's illegal.
Right.
And then the Texas House changed it with one word, right? Knowingly illegally cast a vote.
Sure.
So they said, if you cast an illegal vote, you haven't broken the law. Unless you knew it was illegal when you did it, and unless we as the government can prove that you knew that you were illegally casting a vote when you did.
Well, and that kind of goes back to the whole most crimes require a mens rea, which is then a criminal mind.
Well, no, I would say that mens rea is its own kind of case law. We don't say when you hit somebody, you have to knowingly know that hitting that person with a pipe on the head is illegal at the moment that you swing the bat, right? We don't say that. It's not in law. Not every one of the criminal offenses do we say, as long as we can see that you had a text message where you texted your buddy and said, I'm going to beat the tar out of this guy, and I know it's illegal, right? We just say, you cannot do X. That is illegal, right?
Sure.
And then there's a course of legal process where you have to establish these different levels. But my point in saying that
new, that is something that comes from common law. For your example, right?
Yep.
That comes from common law. That's been illegal for a long time. There is a general assumption that you know that that's illegal. That is less the case when it comes to when your voting rights are restored if you're no longer in prison. It's like now, the knowingly part.
Just to be clear, we're talking about people who are in the country illegally. For the sake of this debate,
I thought we were talking about felons who had
the cases that were being used were illegal immigrants that were voting.
The main
Democrats.
The main case wasn't an illegal immigrant. The main case that was prosecuted was a woman who was on probation or parole.
There are people on probation who have also been under prosecution for casting illegal votes. That's 100% true. There's also now.
Not for it. They were on probation. They were on parole for something else, right? And they thought their voting rights had been restored.
Yes,
they voted.
That's correct.
They were allowed to vote, and then that person was prosecuted. That was what I thought. Now this is an issue from several years ago, But yes, that is the thing. Now we're having that argument. We're having that discussion about why is this happening, right? And I think that's a good discussion to have. But when we go into the campaigns thing, the certain folks, maybe people you work for or not, but will go out and put out a mailer that says this person voted to let illegals vote, or to make it not illegal for illegals to vote, or whatever, right? That isn't really the nuance of the case. That isn't.
I wouldn't. So I don't know of anybody who did that, but I do think that what we can say, and this gets back to what I was saying about legislation. One of the most helpful things, because you mentioned it, sometimes somebody takes a position that says, "Hey, I don't think we can or should, let's say that all Chinese nationals can buy land." Now, they don't say that. They just say, I want to pass a China land ban that does this. And we go, like a China land ban that doesn't ban all Chinese nationals from buying all of Texas?
Right.
Well, what you don't understand is that these people, what I understand is it's being called a China land ban. When you say, I made it illegal for people to cast votes illegally. No, you didn't. You made it illegal for people to knowingly vote illegally and then vote illegally.
Sure.
And there is a big difference in that, right? And so then what happens is you have a lot of individuals who go out and claim that this was where I kind of related with what you were saying is, hey, sometimes we pass bills that aren't really doing what we say they're doing, right? And I have always believed that if everyone could be honest with what each bill does, it would be a lot easier to then agree. So you'll have people that say, oh, well, we killed the Privacy Act, but we took care of that with this Ellen Troxler bill. You didn't say that. You said, hey, I think that maybe solved some of the problems.
Right.
But on the House floor, you had a lot of legislators saying, don't worry, we don't need it. We passed this Ellen Troxler bill. And then you dig into it and you go, okay, so you're telling me in June or September, when this goes into effect, men cannot go into restrooms that women are in. No, I'm not telling you that. Okay, well, then we didn't take care of it. So that's why I say it helps us to get to a point where we can all be honest about the policies.
Sure.
And then, yes, in the course of campaigns, there are conversations about whether this vote raised your pension. This vote funded medical institutions that are socially transitioning children. This vote, and you have a list of things. And then you have debates and discussions on whether or not those bills or those amendments actually did what anyone's saying they're going to do.
Well,
so I do think that that's going to be part
of that issue, like more of just the next layer of that is there were 9,000 bills, 1,200 of them, around 1,200 of them passed in the regular session.
Mm-hmm.
You watch those legislative sessions, they're voting fast. Sometimes they're voting real quick, especially if they went through local consent, but even not, they're trying to move to the more meaty, they're moving to the more meaty bills. Yep. So like there are times where you may vote for something and then you have to go and either the machines malfunction, which I think we can both agree. They just probably pressed the wrong way. They didn't know, and they were told later you voted the wrong way. Go flip it. Yep. We all know that's what's actually happening. And then occasionally the machines do malfunction. But like they're going through so much stuff. They have their list. They could get people who are dyslexic or whatever the one is for numbers. Like they just heard the wrong bill number. They're like, what bill are we on? They were having a conversation with their desk mate about some other thing. And like, oh, I'm voting this way. And then it was just the wrong bill. Mm-hmm. That sort of stuff happens all the time because it's moving so quickly. That's just to say they put their journal statements in, they try to reconcile all these things. But that's how quickly it's moving. And that's how easy it is to misvote. Now let's think about like how we're thinking about the multiple orders of effects of how we get from point A to point B about what a bill actually does. Now we're getting into terms of art from like the campaign folks of, no, we can make this argument that they voted for, this is somehow expanding trans surgeries or something, right? We can start to look at it, and the person who's making that vote, if they had that realization that someone had made that argument or whatever else, may have voted differently or would vote differently in the future. It's just you don't necessarily see that through the haze of
campaigns.
2:00 in the morning or the legislative session. It's 2:00 in the morning. I think this is the bill, and I think this is the way I'm voting on it, and then you move on. Like, it's just the reality of how Texas has a part-time legislature with all the time restraints that it has.
Well, one of the things I appreciate about the more conservative side of the Texas House is that they actually get up. You know, one of the things that they tell you in the legislature is, hey, don't get to the back mic. Don't ask these questions. We got a lot to do. We got a lot going. And one of the things that conservative Republicans often insist on is actually getting up and having a discussion and debate about the substance of the policy. And what this removes is people's excuse for not knowing, right? Now, to your point, there might be somebody who goes, I wasn't in the room when this discussion happened, or I was negotiating some amendment while they were talking about that. And so that's when people change their votes on the record and do things like that. But I do think that it's interesting how often House leadership tries to get people to not have discussions about what's going on. And then when you do talk about the substance of the policy that got voted on, they go, well, you can't really accuse somebody of voting for the thing that they did vote for, because the truth is they didn't really know. And oh, by the way, we're trying to make sure there's not a lot of debate on the House floor, so nobody does know when there is a vote. And we get into this place where you almost want, and I say you, not you.
Sure, but
the elected class is very much incentivized to create a legislative system that is intentionally very cloudy, so that then nobody can ever get accused of voting for the substance of the policy that they voted on, right?
Sure.
So now we can't ever say somebody did what they did because they didn't know they did it when they did it, which I guess makes sense of why they didn't want somebody to get put in jail for voting illegally if they didn't know they voted illegally. It's the same kind of problem that you have. And I think that hopefully we can agree that it's actually more beneficial when we have real discussions about what each vote does, even in the aftermath, because it causes people to go, you know what? I need to know if any policy we're pushing is funding institutions that are also socially transitioning kids, because I don't want to be part of that, right? So I use that one as an example because I know you're in Fort Bend County. J.C. Jatan was, of course, defeated by Matt Morgan. I know a lot of y'all in Fort Bend County are very aware of that race because it was a very contentious race, right? And that was one of those votes that was kind of front and center there, for lack of a better term. But yeah, it was front and center in that campaign. And the important context, because I do understand that the legislative process is nuanced. It is. But some can argue that basically the fact that the legislative process is nuanced means people can't talk about the legislative process or even have honest discussions about the implications of the process. And so it ultimately came down. That's why I think Tony Tinderholt from Arlington went down to Fort Bend County, because J.C. Jatan kept saying, this guy's lying about me. This amendment didn't do it. This is not the substance of it. So Tony has to go back and say, J.C. Jatan and I both serve on the Public Health Committee. We both were in the committee before his bill came to the floor. I asked multiple people in that committee with J.C. Jatan sitting next to me, does this bill ban social transitioning? And they all said, no, no, no. Everybody on the committee knew this bill does not deal with social transitioning. It's dealing with the genital mutilation and the puberty blockers. When JC's bill comes up, it's going to give taxpayer money to these places to build out mental health facilities for kids. So this is where they socially transition the kids, which we already know is not banned in this bill because J.C. Jatan and Tony both serve on the committee. And then Tony tells J.C. before the debate even happens, this is what my amendment does. This is why we need to do it. I think you should accept it. J.C. says no. J.C. gets up and tells his colleagues, this is covered in the bill that we're going to do with Dr. Oliverson. Which does actually cause some of his Republican colleagues to vote with him, right? So they vote with J.C. thinking, oh, we're covering this in the Oliverson bill, which is funny because Dr. Oliverson did not vote against the bill because he knew the amendment was not covered in his bill. And so a lot of those members, when realizing J.C. had been less than honest with them, went and changed their votes. But then the 11 that left their vote, which was Stephanie Click and J.C. Jatan and Drew Darby and a number of people, John Kemple, I think, These guys did it. Then whether they knew it or didn't when it happened, they definitely knew it after because it was a big discussion within the Republicans. A bunch of their colleagues that I might even say were on the more moderate side all went and changed their vote because they're like, this does not reflect what I believe. And at that point in time, when all the dust is settled, you probably can determine these 11 Republicans, I think now know what they voted on. And I think now have kept their vote. And even at that point, when conservatives then step in and say, we want to talk about the substance of this vote for these 11 people, I saw a lot of conservative groups that were basically told, well, you're just misleading everybody and you're not providing context and you're not providing the nuance. So at what level, in your opinion, do you have to get to be able to have an honest discussion about the substance of the policy?
Well, when you're talking about a poison pill amendment like Tinderholtz was, then there's really no discussion.
So
because the issue
and
is,
maybe some of our listeners, what do you mean when you say poison pill amendment? Because some people aren't familiar with that term. So let's talk about
there are a number of, yeah, sure, I'll address the poison pill. So a poison pill amendment is when you add something to a bill that will kill it. And you'll either kill it because you lose support from one side or the other, or whatever the case may be. But often what happens in the Texas legislature are there are a couple of key rules that dictate whether or not a legislation is germane or whether something is germane. And that has to do with there's either a two-subject rule or whether something's germane to the caption. Now, I don't remember specifically on this pill whether there was a two-subject issue concern or if there was a two-subject concern, or if it wasn't germane to the caption, which would be probably effectively the same. But when you're adding something like this, when the bill is affecting a certain area, one of the issues that it can happen is somebody can do this, like Tinderholtz did, and then effectively say or directly say, this is going to be a primary thing. We're doing this on purpose for a primary to JC. Like, then you end up saying like that you're trying to poison pill, you're trying to kill this bill. It's either this bill dies because we add this amendment, and then it gets point of ordered or pooed, depending on how you, or you're gonna have to deal with these mailers saying you're against this policy, which you're actually, or whatever, you're on the opposite side of an issue that you're actually on the right side of.
Yep.
And what JC's point was that, and I'm not going to actually speak for him, but what I recall him saying is that this bill, the whole social transitioning of children, we're trying to ban writ large. We don't need to include it in every single bill because we think we're going to get it done across the board.
Yeah.
So why include it in this very specific legislation? Yeah.
So let me parse that out. I want to get to the poison pill. Maybe we'll have a little bit of discussion on what what people would say is a poison pill amendment. Okay. And I want to tell everybody, who's listening to this, that one of the things I told Garrett, I don't want this to become is some kind of like gotcha. So I'm not expecting you, Garrett, to be an expert on the nuances of that policy and that amendment and all of that. Okay. So I'm not like, if there's something you haven't read that amendment, I'm not expecting to be some like, let's debate the substance of it. Okay. So I want to make it clear to people what this is and is not. Because it'd be real easy for me to pick one or two and then we could debate it, but I didn't give you that beforehand, the bill or anything like that. So we're not going to try to do that. I do think that you're right that that's the point that JC made. I think it is very easy to determine that JC was being very dishonest when he said that was what he had a problem with, because he was actually familiar with the substance of Dr. Oliverson's ban, and he knew that it did not apply to the mental health aspect of what children are doing. He knew that. It was not going to. It did not, right?
Well, why didn't it?
Why didn't it?
Yeah.
Because House leadership did not want to expand the purpose of the bill to include mental health services. Okay. They wanted to start. I always describe that bill as like the 20-week abortion ban. Okay. So when we banned abortion at 20 weeks, right, everyone kind of knew going into it, this is a 20-week abortion ban. And nobody said all abortions are done. We're not aborting children anymore in Texas. They said late-term abortions are illegal in Texas. And then next, is 15-week, and then step it back. That's really what the Oliverson bill was. And while most Republicans wouldn't know that, the people who would know that were Tony Tinderholtz and J.C. Jatan, because they were both on the Public Health Committee, very involved in the bill. They are the ones who sat in the 14-hour hearing and heard all the back and forth about exactly what the bill did. They and their staff read the full bill. They knew the confines of the bill and what it didn't do, which is why when Representative Tinderholt went to J.C. Jatan and said, this is our best shot at getting at the mental health aspect, and this is how we're going to do it, and we can't take a pass on this opportunity because if we don't do it through this bill, we're not going to.
Do you feel increasingly isolated? Like the world has gone insane and you are part of one small, clear-headed remnant? Let me be the first to tell you, you're not alone. I'm Sarah Gonzalez, and on my new show, Come and Take It, I'm going to call out the crazy so you can be empowered to change Texas and the nation. Overcome the schemes of the left designed to keep Texans paralyzed and silent. Watch or listen to Come and Take It today.
Okay, so let me talk about poison pill, though. You brought up two different circumstances, and I think it's worth kind of parsing out the difference.
Right.
And you might say both of them are poison pills. One would be, in your mind, a germane amendment. So it's perfectly germane to the bill. It will not kill the bill from a rules perspective,
Right.
but people view it as a policy that is very conservative, and if you vote against it, you're going to vote against something very conservative, and then somebody might criticize you in your district who's a Republican for doing that. So that, but like, it's not going to kill I want to make sure it's clear. You would say things are poison pills, whether they're going to kill the bill from a point of order perspective or not. Is that true?
Well, yes, but I don't say it would kill the bill, meaning just if you added the amendment, now there isn't enough support for the bill for it to pass.
Okay, so that's a third one. You're right. So one argument would be, and we'll talk about that because I actually think that's probably the one I have the biggest issue with. Okay. And so, but we'll get to that in a second. Okay, so first on the germane thing, my argument is this. So and I'm using the Tinderholt Jatan example because now we've gone down that rabbit hole, so we're not for the substance of it. So Tony had tried to add that amendment the day before on JC's bill, and they had called a point of order on it, and the point of order had been upheld. And so what Tony did for the second day was he rewrote the amendment in accordance with the ruling. So it was germane to the bill, which is also why there was a vote on it. Because if it's not germane to the bill, the point of order gets called on the amendment because nobody wants to vote on the amendment, right? Mm-hmm. And so many times by the time we get to a point to where we're voting on the amendment, we at that point know this amendment is not going to kill this bill because they already tried to say it wasn't germane. It is. Now let's talk. That's functionally speaking how it now works. I would say 95% of the time there's an amendment being debated. That's one thing. The other one that you pointed out was, hey, maybe the bill now lacks the votes to pass. There are some circumstances in which that could be the case. But the vast majority of time, and I would argue well over 90% of the time, the reason that argument doesn't work is because in order for the amendment to pass, it has to receive a majority vote from the body, right? So let's say, as an example, this amendment is going to say that you cannot get this taxpayer-funded grant if you are socially transitioning kids, right? Well, most everybody would say this is a great win. We're now using taxpayer money to actually reward those mental institutions that are actually doing real mental health care to kids. And we're just denying taxpayer money, these extra grants, to these institutions that are socially transitioning kids with transgender ideology. 76 people vote for that amendment. Well, that's your coalition to pass the bill, right?
Not necessarily.
But often, there might be some joint authors or co-authors of the bill that are Democrats. Mm-hmm. So the concern is, well, these people that support the bill won't support the bill if this happens, which is usually the case. Well, now I'm going to pull my support. And I think this gets to often the tug of war that happens, especially on the Texas House. But this is just a tug of war that happens everywhere. County commissions, city councils, all these places where you go, if we govern and enact policy based on how conservative can we make this while still maintaining a majority of the votes needed to pass this, that's like a good place to be. And so we have when we have opportunities to say, hey, if we can get 76 Republicans to vote for this, we can still pass the bill because all of us are here. And I've been very privy to many conversations that have happened that are based on that, saying, hey, if it doesn't pass, then yeah, we get that. But if it does pass, we know we have the votes to pass the bill because we're all voting for the bill. We just want this change made so it's more conservative. And so I do think that is something to really take into consideration when it comes to kind of poison, what is a poison pill or not.
Can I address that a little bit?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Garrett.
I think that is your example, I think works when there's kind of a binary for or against a given topic, wherein like there's like one reason to be for or against it, and if you fix it, you can start moving people one direction or another. But when there are other reasons to be against it, let's look at like school choice in the last go around, where there were folks from the left and right who ended up being against it. I think you had someone on the right on your show that talked about a more conservative argument against school choice. There are ways in which you're going to move back and forth on that pendulum, where you're going to pick up some of those conservatives that might be against it, or you can move to the left to pick up the left to get those folks. But you're not going to get both. Well, when you do something like this, where you anger a good portion of the coalition behind a given bill, in this case, I think we should really be clarify. And I'm speaking from memory here.
Yes,
that this was for emergency medicine. This wasn't for long-term care. This was for people for children who have experienced an emergency medical psychiatric break of some sort, which is basically saying they're suicidal or homicidal. So there is less, I think, in my mind, I don't care as much if a doctor uses the wrong pronoun or the right pronoun or whatever we want to say for that, to get that kid to a point where they're stable and then move them forward. Because I don't think that's part of the transitioning process. I think that's part of the stabilizing process. And you would be limiting, that was part of the pushback from on the left, which is probably valid pushback when you're talking about what's the point of this bill. The point of this bill is to keep people from killing themselves. And because it's for emergency medical centers, it was to expand emergency centers to have psychiatric capabilities for emergency situations for youth, for minors. So when we're talking about an emergency situation versus a long-term or even a short-term state, we're talking about the stabilizing aspect. This is a critical situation. They are about to kill themselves. They've already attempted. We need to get to them to a point where let's get past that. Whatever a doctor needs to say to get them there, I'm okay with. And if they're having to use their judgment to get them to that point of they're stable and then we move forward, that's my view. You might disagree, but neither of us are psychiatrists dealing with emergency medical situations. So I feel as if I should defer slightly in this very specific area to those who are, doing the triage and doing the actual work.
So I parsed that out a couple different places. One, I would say, no, I don't think we should operate in a world where we say that, hey, sometimes you just got to tell a girl she's a boy in order to stabilize the situation. You're basically taking things that are dark lies, they're like based on a foundation of lies, and trying to insert those into somebody's head and heart and soul in the midst of a crisis and chaos would be one of the most, I think, hateful things you could do for that person. So often we do look at this policy in a way of saying, what can we do to love our neighbor? What can we do to help those who are in crisis? And we would say, well, one of the things we do want to do is make sure that we protect them from these lies that will simply put them into deeper and darker places in their life. That's one thing. Second of all, the reason this particular piece of legislation died, because it did die when it went over to the Senate, is that it wasn't actually thinking well through the process of how to prioritize where the bill money was going to go. Sure. And the money was just kind of this. Many people on the Senate side saw this as this big just money giveaway to all these mental health institutions. So it wasn't actually doing a good job of focusing on where there was the biggest need. It was going to be this just big bucket that everyone was just going to come grab money from. And what we were offering to do is use your money and mine and everybody who listens here to go build facilities for these hospitals. We are going to build you more beds. Okay. Now, everybody says they don't have enough beds, so everybody needs beds. And what this would say is, well, we're not going to build every bed that everybody could possibly want in the entire state of Texas. That's not going to happen. Never has, never will. So how are we going to determine where we as taxpayers prioritize the beds? It's like saying, how are we going to prioritize where people get mammograms? Well, we just don't want them to be at abortion facilities. So like you can get mammograms, you're not getting them at the abortion facilities. And this is basically the same way this approach, and I think this is a general approach that the right should use more, where we say, hey, there's this pile of money that we're going to give. We can't give it to everybody since there's all these mental health care institutions. As long as you can affirm when your application, when you apply for this grant, we do not try to socially transition children in our facility, which applies to a lot of facilities, by the way, just not some really crazy left-wing ones.
Right.
Then that's where the money is going to get prioritized. And you've also then built an incentive to these other institutions say, well, I really want that money. Okay, well then stop socially transitioning kids with dangerous transgender ideology, right? And you build in these financial incentives for them because I want to go again, a lot of these are private institutions. These aren't government facilities. These are private institutions. And you go, we don't owe you a taxpayer-funded facility. There might be people that argue against doing that ever. But in the event that we're going to pay for it, we're going to make sure it goes towards these facilities that need it. And so that's just something to kind of consider. Let's go back to the special session because we can come back to several of these things, and I want to close with some of it. But let's go back to special session. So Women's Privacy Act, we agree that Republicans have the votes. We should pass that bill this special session.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I haven't read the actual text of the bill, but yeah, just
I understand.
Yeah.
But this, I mean, you're familiar with the fact that this has been a debate since Joe Strauss was speaker, right? I mean, like, it's a bill.
A lot of people lost seats in 18 because of it, because Democrats were able to run against it when the maps were run. So that's kind of made people.
I think Valerie Swanson had 3 Democrats that co-authored the bill. It never got a hearing, but like she had 3 Democrats.
No, I'm talking about the one from 2018. The bathroom bill, like the one that, what's his name, Ron Simmons did. It killed Ron Simmons' career because he carried the bathroom bill in 18 and Beckley was able to beat him with it.
So that definitely did not kill Ron Simmons' career because every Republican lost in that district, including a bunch of people who had nothing to do with the women's privacy bill. So if Ron underperformed the rest of the Republican ticket, you could probably point to it and say,
I don't recall.
Okay, Ron was affected. Like there was these people voting Republican, and then they were voting against Ron Simmons. They were Republican voters voting for Michelle Beckley.
I think it did.
But in Ron
I think it hurt
situation,
because Rodney kept winning very minor races, even above board, and then he got killed.
Yeah. So just a couple things to kind of think about when it comes to that cycle as well. You had a bunch of Republicans lose, and if you look at it, they're basically all around the same place in the Republican ticket. So Rodney, Rinaldi, and Linda Coop. And I like these 3 examples in Dallas County because it's like a good example of Linda Coop is probably one of the most moderate Republicans in the legislature. She was endorsed by Planned Parenthood and teacher unions. Mm-hmm. Okay, so she that's who you'd want in a general election. You go, man, the pro-abortion lobby is literally telling people to vote for me as a Republican. The teacher unions are telling people to vote for me as a Republican. She loses, right? Why? Well, you wouldn't. If I were to tell you, Linda Coop, she was pro-choice and it killed her, you would probably tell me, Luke, that's not what killed her, right? What killed her was the fact that Beto O'Rourke came within 2 points of beating Ted Cruz. And if you look at it, Republicans across the board then got swept out of office. Countywide people, locals, legislators, and we got them in all stripes within all factions of the Republican Party. It would be dishonest for me to go and tell everybody Linda Coop lost because she was aligned with teacher unions. She lost because Beto O'Rourke came within 2 points of beating Ted Cruz. The same that it would be dishonest, I think, if people go, Ron Simmons lost because of the women's privacy bill. Because you go, Ron actually performed well in his district, but he far outperformed Ted Cruz, but you had to outperform Ted Cruz by, 10. You had to have 1 in 10 people voting for you as a Republican and Beto, and most people just could not pull anything like that off. In fact, nobody really did, that cycle. When you look at the people who, the biggest crossover ballots are people like Morgan Meyer, Highland Park, Park Cities, those very wealthy places have a lot more crossover. But I think that's worth kind of explaining before we say that Ron
I think
Simmons
it's also worth explaining that what the similarities between 2018 and 2026 are that it's a Trump midterm election, with what will almost certainly be a very charismatic Democrat Senate candidate that somehow gets $200 million one way or the other, no matter who the Republican candidate is, and that they may start, we might have some issues like we had in 2018, so we should look at it. Now, I agree, we do have the votes. We should probably pass it. The landscape between 2018 and 2026 has changed. It's the kind of calculus people are going to look at in these more suburban districts are, I have to figure out a way to win a general election and a primary, and I'm not sure how I'm going to thread that needle. That's why when we talked about Ken King and leadership, or even Dan Patrick in leadership, certain things don't come to the floor because there are some members who will lose if they have to take a vote on a given issue. And if they do enough of those votes, or if those people are like, they're going to start losing those majorities. So that's something to really consider whenever you're looking at it, is like, you know what, we might have the political will to get this done today, but how much risk does that put our ticket in and our majority and our leadership in if we do it all in this session versus spreading it out over 2 or 3?
But you would agree that Governor Abbott has been rather prudent in how he has navigated and addressed issues.
Oh, yeah.
So you wouldn't say that Abbott has been foolhardy and just trying to like risk our majority in the stuff he's picking.
No.
You know that the governor's team.
I think if you follow the governor's lead, you're likely to do well. I mean,
okay.
if history has shown that. That said, the governor has a statewide district. So he's looking at the statewide picture, and it's going to be different for folks in Fort Bend County, where we have a far different voting makeup than the rest of the state. Like, so that those calculations are going to be different for any individual representative.
So I'm trying to understand where we're at the same page.
Yep.
Okay. Governor Abbott has been careful to make sure to pick policies that have a broad level of appeal, because he has not wanted to send a bunch of his own Republican members over a waterfall. Would you agree? Because that's my opinion.
Generally, yeah.
But when you say generally, are you saying he sometimes does want to put them? I'm not like, no, I'm trying to understand what we agree on.
What I'm saying is that there are times where there are folks where, well, how do I say this? Because, well, I'm not speaking for the governor by any stretch of the imagination, but from my community, from what I'm seeing from the outside looking in at this point, is that there are times where the governor is taking a stand for his own primary run and his own general run that he knows some folks will vote against on the Republican side just because of their own primaries or their own generals, but that he still thinks will get across the finish line. Does that make sense? There's enough cover for some folks to take certain votes depending on, but yeah, he's going to push for things that he thinks are good. All right, and that should get done. And then they're generally okay, but it's not like the end all be all. The governor says it, so it shall be done. We live in a democracy.
We agree that the governor has not picked a policy agenda that puts the Republicans at risk, majority-wise, and in a bunch of these districts, because he's not functioned that way. He's pulled a lot of issues. His team thinks about all of those issues and how they fall in the general. I think that's generally agreed to by all factions of the Republican Party. That's how Governor Abbott has largely approached things.
I'd say that's probably accurate.
Okay.
But so I would add the caveat is it doesn't necessarily mean that the most, diehard of grassroots opinion on how all those issues should be if we were to pass them all legislation in that way, I think we might be in danger of losing the majorities and losing some statewide seats. That said, I don't think the issues themselves will put us at risk if we pass them in thoughtful ways.
Yeah, like the women's privacy bill and the transgender issue is a huge winner for Republicans in the general, with suburban people, with women voters, and various demographics that Democrats need to have a successful cycle.
Absolutely.
So women's privacy, abortion pill, taxpayer-funded lobbying, property tax relief, redistricting that will likely result in as few as 3 and as many as 5 additional Republican seats. Are we generally in agreement that this is a Republican agenda that Republicans can unite behind. What's your view of that?
My view, so redistricting, it really depends on how much they were real careful on the last redistricting, it seemed, to make sure to go out of their way to just secure the kind of gains they had over the past decade. 2018 was fresh in their minds, where you have a wave blue year. How many seats would you lose? That times out for 2030, like what's the impact that's going to have? When it's just congressional, there's less of that fear. And if the congressional delegation wants to take that risk, I don't really see there being an issue there from inside the party. Now, you might end up having people who get pissed because they move from a Republican district to a Democrat district. There's always going to be that sort of criticism when you actually see the actual maps themselves. But no,
you're saying not members of Congress, but like individuals who now live in a Democrat district.
Yeah, right. If you go for I'm in Troy Nell's district. If I got put in Lizzie Fletcher's district, I'd probably be pissed off, especially if that wasn't now a competitive district. Right?
Would you be less pissed off if it resulted in 3, 4, or 5 new Republican congressmen going to Washington, D.C. on our behalf?
Yeah, me personally, but not everyone's, going to look at it like that.
Yeah, I understand. Because I get the low.
I'm just offering what's going to happen is whenever the maps come out, there are going to be very specific people who are angry about it for reasons that are very personal that don't they're going to get there. But yes, no, you're absolutely right. My biggest problem with taxpayer-funded lobbying is that it's just, I don't think that the bills, it looks like Mays Middleton's bill is going to be the vehicle. I looked through it yesterday. There's like 25 different vehicles for this. So I don't know what they all say. Didn't have the time to read them all. But the way it's going about doing it, it's very targeted at TASB and TAC and the Municipal League. And those companies, since they're technically 501c3s or 501c whatevers, they're going to immediately sidestep this restriction. It's not going to take them a day to file a new organization that just does the lobbying that's separate from the issue. And it codifies that governments can still send their elected officials and their employees, actual employees of an institution, to the Capitol, which, we probably should still allow, but I haven't heard good arguments for why a mayor from Arlington shouldn't come down and talk, because that's kind of taxpayer funded if they have their travel reimbursed. But we were talking about hiring lobbyists. They're going to get around it so fast, and it's like, oh, we did all this, we spent all this political capital on it. It's an issue. Why don't we just keep fighting it the way we've been fighting? It's like, if TASB's for something, you probably shouldn't be for it, or there's an issue with it, right? That's what I don't understand on this issue, is why are we spending the political capital on it when they're going to get around it so quickly, it'll make your head hurt. And there's really no way to get around it legally, or where you can actually restrict it, because they'll just create a PAC that's self-funded by something else. It'll be very much associated with,
though, not by our tax dollars, right?
Technically, but we want to plan.
I want to make clear. Sorry, Garrett, I just want to make clear. You say technically.
Yeah.
Are you saying if a leftist who's, very for school, teacher unions starts a PAC and puts $1 million into that, that's technically not our taxpayer dollars, but maybe in some way is? That's
what
I'm trying to understand.
Saying is what they'll reorganize in ways which that taxpayer dollars doesn't technically go towards it, right?
Correct.
Because the way it's currently structured is those taxpayer dollars are actually for the service. Right, you have the membership fees, but the majority of TASB, for example's money comes from the insurance and from the buy board or whatever. So most of that money that's taxpayer funded is not really taxpayer funded. It's taxpayer, they spent it like it's AT&T. So should AT&T not?
No. But it is taxpayer funded, meaning all of it's taxpayer funded, because any of the things they're providing are to taxpayer funded entities that are paying.
So
them,
AT&T shouldn't have lobbyists?
No. I want to be clear what we're saying about
if we're
TASB.
talking about. Well, I'm talking about the same thing. And this is the problem we'll have when it goes to court. If they decide to challenge it, is if you're making the argument that they're buying insurance from TASB means that money that they're paying for a service is now taxpayer dollars, then any vendor that the state uses, like AT&T or whatever else, that's the thing. They're buying telecommunications from it. Should AT&T not have lobbyists?
TASB is a wholly owned subsidiary of government entities because they are an association of government entities.
But they're organized as a 501c3.
And what the prohibition is going to do, because it is written in such a way, just to be clear, all these people that have ever done any work with any government are not sitting here going, oh my gosh, this could affect all of us, because they know it won't. Because I think if you read Mays Middleton's bill, it's clear it doesn't.
It's careful to try to.
What it is clear that it does is it says these taxpayer-funded entities, the government, cannot pay lobbyists to lobby the government, right? And then it says associations that are just associations of a bunch of government entities can also not lobby, right? It actually doesn't say they can't do something with insurance, they can't do this. And you did what you said at the start, which is, well, they're just going to spin off a lobbying arm, which is probably what they are going to do. That's fine, because that lobbying arm cannot get funded with all of our collective taxpayer money. That lobbying arm, they have to go find private philanthropists to engage with that lobbying arm so that there can be a school board Texas advocacy group that receives private money and then uses that private money to advocate, which we are all fine with. I think you and I are fine with. Even if those groups are advocating for things we disagree with, we go, that's okay. That's part of this process. Right. Everybody comes to the table. They all give their perspectives. But what you currently have is a school board that uses all of our money collectively to then hire lobbyists. And it specifically says this. You mentioned, I don't know why you need to spend all this political capital. Taxpayer-funded lobbying, if you just poll the issue, right? It's 90% of Republicans that think you should not have taxpayer money used to hire lobbyists to lobby the government by other governments. It's a majority of independents. It's actually a sizable amount of Democrats. Mm-hmm. People just generally don't
it's great marketing.
Like the idea.
I'm
not saying they fully understand it, but it's general. So I guess my question is, why does it take so much political capital to do that? Because the Senate heard the bill yesterday. It passed unanimously out of state affairs, including Democrats that voted for it. The governor has supported this policy for a very long time. It's been a Republican Party of Texas priority. Mm-hmm. I think one of the frustrations that my side, when I say my side, the side that I'm on in the Republican Party has, is why is it taking a lot of political capital to do this when it just flew out of the Senate State Affairs unanimously? Like, this shouldn't be one that we're actually expending political capital on, because Republicans should look at each other and go, yeah, let's just do this. And yeah, there might be some changes and there might be some adjustments, and then you can go pass another bill and another bill to try to make sure you close these loopholes if there are loopholes that exist. Well, so why is it taking so much political capital to do something that 9 out of 10 Republicans in a room will say they support, 60% of independents will say they support, 30% of Democrats? Shouldn't those kind of things be things that we're able to accomplish as a party without spending quote unquote political capital? What do you think?
I think the main reason, and you're going to it's going to sound, I think the main reason is all of these people, like you said, are elected, are all the organizations we're looking at are made up of elected officials. They're made up of mayors and school board members and county commissioners and county judges for the most part, because the sheriffs are carved out for whatever reason. All those people, there's a lot of them who, if you were to do this, would be angry at the incumbents that voted for it. And now you have a whole bunch of people who have abilities, have experience running elections and being in elected office, that now are far more likely to want to have a reason to run against you. They didn't necessarily need before, but now you have a lot more targets on your back in your local area. On top of the fact that their messaging is pretty good to their own base and to their own members and the teachers and whatnot. So now you have a whole thing of like, oh, whether it's this issue or not that you're mad at, you kind of start to see you have some risk now, because there's a lot of people in your district who actually like the issue, because TASB goes out, and I'm not defending these organizations or saying that this is good. I think you're right.
Yep.
That the taxpayer-funded lobbying is ridiculous. I think that the reason why it doesn't pass is because there's a lot more clout behind these organizations than just the elected officials who do it. It's the fact that those elected officials are out and they're spread out all over the state, and they impact every single member that's voting for this one way or the other. That's one part of it. But I also think the second part is I wanted to drill down specifically on the technical issue that I was talking about, which is that the money comes in So there's taxpayer money, which is the association fee,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's the money for a fee for service, because it's an association. It's still a 501c3, so it's just a nonprofit business. It's still a business. So that money is not that money would not be viewed as taxpayer money in any reasonable thing without it applying to your AT&Ts of the world, your the mom and pop shop in Denison, or whatever the case may be. If you're a vendor of a local government or of the state government, you now are having, if you want to count it as taxpayer funded dollars, if it's a fee for service, now they can spend that money off, which is already the money they're using, because it's a 501c3 organization. They can't spend more than 5 to 10% of their budget on their budget, not even their revenue. The revenue, not even like what it would be like extra. They can't spend more than 5 to 10% of it without running afoul of IRS laws on lobbying. So you're already spending only about 5 to 10% of the budget, which is still a lot of money. Don't get me wrong, but it's only 5 to 10% maximum, just based off of not violating federal law. You don't think they're going to be able to spend off 5 to 10% of their money through all sorts of whatever loopholes that's still taxpayer money under your definition to fund this? I see it happening so quickly, and that it's, we're doing all this. So now you have people in areas with a lot of TASB, you want to call them educrats, you just TASB members or whatever.
Can I answer? Because I think you've read the Mays bill.
I've read the Mays bill.
And so it says you cannot pay a nonprofit association or organization that A, primarily represents a political subdivision and hires or contracts with an individual required to register as a lobbyist under Chapter 305, right? So I want to be clear with what you're saying, because this is where I get kind of confused with how that does. AT&T does not primarily represent political subdivisions.
But it's not treating them fairly. It's treating them unfairly. Like there would be a cause of action that says you are unfairly singling out my organization. Okay, well, that's a whole other litigation thing.
Okay. Is the fact that TASB will sue to try to keep spending our taxpayer money to lobby the government on behalf of other governments?
Well, I think they'll win. I don't have as nearly as the confidence that.
Okay, so let me say this.
Current Attorney General.
And we could go round and around on litigation,
and that's just opinion, right?
Okay, if they sue, so maybe this, and I know this is a big if, so just bear with me here for a second. So it seems like your position is, we've thrown out all of your concerns, but then you go, I think they'll win. Okay, but then you also say, I think it's ridiculous that we're doing it. So if we ban it like this, and TASB sues and says we're being treated unfairly, and they lose, at that point in time, would you say, oh, I'm really glad we did this. I thought it was going to be illegal, but it's not, and that's great. Like, would we at least agree that it would be good if it was upheld?
Yes, if it was upheld, not just that it was upheld, but if it was upheld and they weren't able to figure out a way to get that money to, like, taxpayer money, not just some money to an outside group.
Well, if they figured that out, wouldn't it be good to pass a bill that also stops that if they find a loophole?
I don't know how you would. Yes,
well,
if you can.
We'd have to figure out.
So here's my corollary.
We don't know how they would,
doesn't die.
What loophole they would do,
about it,
right?
We keep having to find ways. I'd like to just get it done, and so we can keep trying. We should move forward towards it. I think that you end up having a lot of people who don't want it to happen for the reasons I've mentioned, that have less to do with the philosophical and more to do with just the issues of their own independent in their districts. And like, that ends up being a whole other question, because now it's and then there's philosophical questions, but I don't think we need to get into that, because I think we agree. But it would be an interesting conversation to have. But that's kind of where I'm at with it. It's like, I don't think the bills as listed are going to do what they say they're going to do. Or at the very least, they're not going to be like, oh, we banned taxpayer-funded lobbying, and then TASB will be back in the next session, and they'll be like, oh, I thought we banned you. It's like, you tried. It's whack-a-mole, and you're just going to keep playing it, and you're never going to win.
But I don't think we'll never win, but I do think we at least should agree, because you've said you don't like that this happens. It shouldn't happen. And if we could find a way for it not to happen, it would be good. So we can work on trying to get that done.
I think the only real way real way to do it, and this will actually make some people mad on a philosophical level, would be just to not allow people to join governments to join associations. Just generally, like local governments can't join associations, and then you have a whole other fight.
Garrett, in closing, by wrapping up, I would love to just, first of all, thank you for coming on. I know there's a long conversation we could have about a bunch of different realities within the Texas GOP and the legislative process and the campaigns and all of that. For a little while, I don't know when it was. It's probably been at least for the last year and a half. I've invited you on. I'm very grateful that you were willing to come on. We represent, we are both considered in different factions within the Republican Party. I think that's a safe statement to say. Mm-hmm. And so there's things that are similar. You and I were both homeschooled in the 90s and the early thousands, and we both live in Texas. We both have been involved in both the campaign side and the governing side, legislative side of things, both involved in the party at different levels. And so I do appreciate you coming on. I know that we've had various disagreements on some slight differences, and I hope that we can at least start to peel those apart, because one of the things I believe has happened is that the Republican Party is more united today than it ever has been. That's my opinion. You might, of course, speak to a different opinion, but I do think that there is less friction within the elected Republicans. There is less friction within the party, and this is not a kumbaya situation. There are still definitely factions, definitely people that like it, don't like each other. But one of the reasons that there is less friction, we also had an all-time high friction, to be clear, a couple of years ago. So, I mean, we're coming out of, it's a low bar set to say it's come down. But I think that's where we should keep heading. I personally see the path towards a more unified Republican Party. We're never going to be completely unified on everything. Is some shared facts when it comes to the substance of what a policy does or doesn't do, an accurate articulation by elected officials of what those policies do. It's easier to have a conversation about that when that happens. And then also a willingness for Republicans in the party, activists online, to be able to discuss the differences in a way that is respectful. And I think you and I have been able to do that here today. But I'm really grateful. Anything you want to kind of say as we close?
Yeah, I agree with the overall sentiment that we need to start having shared facts. I think we also need to start hammering out what the actual shared goal is and worry less about how we get there in party conversations until we start to actually have those, like until we have agreement of we should ban taxpayer-funded lobbying. Mm-hmm. Now we need to have conversations about how we're going to do it and what is seen as a victory in the short, near, and long term. Right. So we need to so that folks who are only wanting to just basically just ban TASB and the folks who are like, yeah, we should probably restrict it a little bit. We can move those people along the process as we do it. That's where I think a lot of our disagreements come in, is we may end up having an ultimate policy goal that's similar or outright the same. And we need to kind of have those conversations where we do agree about what the goal is and that we may differ on the mechanisms and work on those mechanisms differently. But we right now it seems to me on my side that there's a lot of folks on your side or on the other side or whatever, and I'm sure my folks do it, I just don't see it, that get more mad at somebody, whether they're pushing policy that they agree with how they push the policy. And I think we need to start having those conversations. If we can start talking about that not being as much of a problem, I think we fix a lot of the problems to get to a more unified party.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, Garrett. Thank you for spending the time with me. I think we went a little past the time that we had originally kind of targeted, but I think it was worth addressing some of these issues, and appreciate it. And we will continue to have these discussions, I'm sure, over the next several years as Texas stays red and hopefully continues to advance conservative policy agenda through the legislative process. And I think as that happens, we'll be even more united as a party. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Luke. I appreciate it.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed that conversation. One of the things I do just want to kind of tell you going into it, I think I've invited Garrett on a number of times, and so I was appreciative of the fact that he's willing to come on. I've tried to find different people that kind of make up the other faction of the GOP that are willing to come on and have a conversation. I told Garrett going into it, I don't want to get you in some kind of gotcha. I don't think that's helpful. So even within the discussion we were having about the J.C. Jatan Amendment and other stuff like that, like I didn't give him all these. We didn't agree to 2 or 3 topics. We just said, we'll see where it goes. My goal was that you would kind of understand the difference in perspective on how we kind of approach policy, the legislative process, campaigns. I think that came out in the course of it. And so I'm appreciative of Garrett's willingness to come on and have that conversation. There is a lot going on in Texas, but I don't have time to talk about a lot of it because I have to go. But I really do appreciate all of your willingness to stay engaged with the show, to share it with all the people you know in the state of Texas. We are continuing to see Texas move to the right, and that only happens with everybody engaging on every single level they can, and that makes up a ton of the people that I know listen and watch the show on a weekly basis. So I'm grateful for you. May God bless you, and may God bless Texas.